Hi, everybody, and welcome to IFMA's webinars. Today, we are partnering with our partner, Reaply, to discuss the missing link in circular facilities management, why furniture, fixtures, and equipment, FF&E, reuse needs standardization. As you're joining this webinar, please let us know where you're joining us from. So I am Kim Jackson. I'm with IFMA, and I'm joining you from Houston, Texas. Today is going to be a really interactive webinar. We're going to use Mentimeter. So there's going to be opportunities for you to provide your insight and feedback. And then please use the comment section to ask any questions or to post any comments that you would like for the webinar panelists to see. At the end of the webinar, there will be some time to take some questions. So again, let us know where you're joining us from. And I'm really interested to see how standardization is going to help in this area. So please join us, Zolo and Valentina.
Great. Thanks, everybody. It's really exciting to see you all here today. To kick things off, we will introduce ourselves as well. Great. So my name is Rachel Zoltarski, but I go by Zolo, so that's what you'll hear Valentina call me throughout the presentation. I'm the Director of Customer Success here at Reaply, and my day-to-day is spent working closely with our customers on making sure that they're getting great value from the assets that they already own, whether that looks like collaborating on best practices and processes, or actually showing up on site and ultimately becoming very familiar with all of the different task shares that they have in their portfolio. And so enough about me. I'll pass it over to Valentina to introduce herself.
Thanks, Zola. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. I'm Valentina Rappa. I'm a senior manager focused on circular economy innovation for Reaply. And that means I get to work with organizations to break down ambiguous challenges around resource consumption and end-of-life materials management with the ultimate goal of reducing waste, saving money, and addressing Scope 3 emissions. I work with customers to experiment and pilot circular economy programs on the Reaply technology, and then the hopes is to use that to scale it over time and see a significant impact across the world. So very excited to be here today. I'll share a little bit now about Reaply and who we are. We have been around for quite some time, since 2016. Our main focus is scaling B2B reuse. We work with customers ranging from enterprises to government agencies, and as well as universities and small businesses. And we're committed to building localized supply chains that are powered by reuse. We use technology to enable the connection between organizations so that we can share resources across organizations and, again, avoid landfill, save money. So on this slide, we have a ton of really cool stats. I won't go through all of them, but one of my favorite is the 4,000 plus partners that we have across our ecosystem. We, as I mentioned, work with a variety of organizations, K through 12 schools, universities, nonprofits. All of them are part of this broader ecosystem we need to develop, because reuse definitely cannot function and exist within a silo. We need to bring together organizations of all different types to make that possible. And our vision is to use technology to support that. For today, we have a jam-packed agenda. The next 60 minutes will be pretty interactive. We covered at the top of the webinar that we're going to be using Menti, so get ready to respond to us with some questions that we have in mind. We'll also be chatting about just basics of the circular economy, so we won't spend too much time on this, but we'll cover some fundamentals. And then we'll talk about what do we even mean by standardization, how do we approach this, how are we even thinking about this, and then reveal what the result of a lot of our work has been over the past months. And then with that, we'll share the broader impact across the industry we work in, corporate real estate, and working with organizations across the world. And then lastly, we'll leave you all with a parting gift, which we're very excited to share. You'll be the first to receive it. So please do stay to the end in order to get that goodie bag. And then throughout this entire session, we want to get your questions. We'd love to get your feedback. We have two amazing team members, Sam and Katie, that are monitoring the chats, whether you're joining from LinkedIn or YouTube. please, add your questions. You might get a real-time response from our team members. If not, we're also setting aside questions. Zola and I will make sure we have a lot of time at the end to address those. But with that, I think we can jump in and we'll move straight into our poll. So we shared a lot about ourselves, and we'd love to learn a little bit more about you and some of the challenges that you're facing across furniture reuse and in general, just within the field. So we're going to use Menti as mentioned. You can scan this QR code. You can also open up another tab in your computer and go into the Menti website. The code is on the screen here. And then we'll give you all a second to get adjusted, and then we'll jump into the questions we have. So we wanted to start this off more so with understanding your process when you're sourcing furniture. In many cases, organizations have a move, add, change request that comes up. Maybe you have a really large scale innovation, a renovation. Maybe you're closing a building, reopening a building that was off for COVID days. In all those scenarios, we're curious what you do first. It seems like what we have here is a lot of people buy new, which is a status quo, not surprising, but almost equal. Folks are looking at existing inventory and trying to leverage what they have on their campus already so that they don't have to buy new. So that is
It's refreshing.
Yes,
Yeah. That's what we love to see.
I'm impressed. And I think that actually then the content we'll share with you today will be really helpful because like you're already doing some of the early stage work. But I won't neglect those who are still buying new and also trying to buy used. I'm actually curious, Zola, you've worked with a lot of customers more recently on buying used furniture.
Yeah, I'm definitely seeing it come up more and more, especially with just long lead times and sometimes the urgency of quick turnaround projects with some of the portfolio needs, whether it's the return to office or a request coming in from an executive that needs a quick turnaround. So definitely seeing more buy used furniture for sure.
Yeah, super cool that we can find that at scale, when organizations are trying to source a lot of items. All right, we'll jump to the next question. This was great. Now, keeping that in mind, okay, what do you do when you first need to source furniture? Going beyond that, if you do have some type of reuse program in place, how would you describe your current approach to reuse? It could be we don't do this, we're thinking about it maybe for the future, or we're pretty familiar with this. In many cases, yeah, I would say the fact that a formalized system is probably the least common. We are working a lot with organizations to make that the status quo, but that is certainly not the case today. I like to see a lot of ad hoc.
Yeah, I think we're seeing that trend here that you're saying, Valentina, where there might be some formalized systems, but it's not always the majority.
Exactly. And with the unpredictable world we're living in, so many changes. I think a lot of organizations have learned from some of the challenges of COVID when it came to how they had to respond quickly and work in situations they've never encountered in the past. But there are endless opportunities for different challenges to come up that we cannot anticipate. So being prepared for that kind of future state by having some system is helpful, whether it's the most simple system possible. Okay, cool. So we got most people are informal or ad hoc. Totals makes a lot of sense. I think the content we're going to share today will still be really relevant and helpful for you. And our final question. Okay, now we're going to look more at just the impact of this work. Zola and I, of course, think that there's a lot of amazing benefits and opportunities for reusing items, but we're curious from your side, where do you see the most benefit when you're looking to adopt a reuse practice that is some kind of standardized process or system that you have across an organization?
I like the dots. I was expecting another bar graph, but this is cool.
I imagine they're little marbles that I'm like rolling out.
Yes, yeah. Okay, well, unsurprisingly, increased cost savings and resource optimization. That tends to be a big driver for most of our customers. So that makes a lot of sense to see that here.
Definitely. And, you know, data accuracy as well, I will say, is probably, I mean, all of these go hand in hand, but like a data accuracy, I would say is something that's like, at least throughout the process we've gone through with this standardization, um, it's probably like the least sexy, least fun thing to talk about, but makes such a big impact and
Huge,
actually is like so
huge
cool
difference.
when it works.
Yeah, a huge difference.
Okay, cool. Well, this has been really helpful. If you want to keep on adding your thoughts, please do. We'll collect this data at the end and then share out the results. But we do want to continue on with some of the content we have for today. So I want to get everyone imagining a little bit. We see a photo here of a beautiful office chair. This whole session, of course, is going to be focused really on FF&E, furniture, fixtures, and equipment. And for this scenario, you're sitting in the office chair you're in right now, looking at the one on the screen, thinking about just the look and feel of that chair, the composition of it, how it's used across your organization, how many butts have sat in that chair that you're in today, if you're not working from home. So keep that in mind. And then we're going to zoom out and look at the bigger picture of what probably exists across a lot of your campuses, which is that office chair is now sitting in a storage room with all these other office chairs that look practically the same. And it becomes really hard when you have a refresh coming up across your campus or a day-to-day moves, add, change request that comes up. You need to respond to those opportunities with strategic decisions that save you money and often in many cases thereby prioritize reuse. But you're doing this at scale, right? Like this is one snippet of a room that probably represents a whole building on your campus or multiple external warehouses that your organization uses. If, of course, size varies across organizations, it might not be as large scale for you, but this is often a small example of a bigger problem that we see across a lot of organizations. Now, the vision here is really to try to go beyond that and try to address all the challenges and frustrations that come with managing inventory of that size. And we feel like that it really is rooted in some basic principles of the linear economy and the circular economy. So although that photo looks kind of crazy and seems very frustrating for someone, that's happening across the world every day, major companies, it doesn't matter how tech savvy your company is, you're probably still depending on a lot of linear processes. We know that the audience might be pretty familiar with the concept of the circular economy. So we're going to spend just a quick second to cover the fundamentals of it as a refresher. If you're new to this and you want to learn more, then we'll share our emails at the end and I'd be happy to chat more, share more resources. But for the purpose of today, I'll just give a high level. So people often say that we are living in a linear economy where we are sourcing non-renewable resources. We are then making products, using those products, and often trashing them after one use. We know this isn't good for our wallets. We know this is bad for the environment, but the reality is behavioral change is really hard, especially at scale. And organizations like Reaply and many others are trying to make the circular economy more accessible. We're using that by technology. Other organizations are doing many other techniques to approach it. But the reality is we need a groundswell of innovation, research, and as well organizations just willing to participate and test these new methods in order to make a circular economy real and something that exists across our various borders and countries. Now, the concept of a circular economy now, if you're just thinking of how we define it and what we think of that term, that is looking at keeping products and materials in use for as long as possible. We want to acknowledge the inherent value in these materials and share them across organizations so they're not wasted before they need to be. And we're typically doing that by ensuring that we're getting the most use out of the product and also accounting for the embodied carbon that was emitted when that product was manufactured. So we won't talk too much about embodied carbon throughout the rest of this session, but this graphic here just gives you a really good example of how embodied carbon differs across different product types. So if you're looking at a desk, that's a wood desk here, about 2 times the weight of that desk is the embodied carbon that went into making it, the material sourced for it, transportation, end of life use of that material when it was trashed. But then you look at a material like a laptop or any of our electronics, you look at the massive data centers that exist all across the US, all the electronic hardware in those data centers, they're often 100 times the weight of that product is the embodied carbon. It is huge. It's a really significant part of our built environment. I know IFMA talks a lot about this, and this is probably not the first webinar you joined for IFMA that discuss this, but we really wanted to paint the picture of the broader impact that this has beyond just the money coming out of your budgets and the trash that's building up in landfills. The embodied carbon also is a really big piece to this. So we want to set the stage. That's kind of the background and the overview of circular economy. And I'd love for Zola now to take us through the standardization process.
Yeah, thanks, Valentina. I remember when I first learned about all of those embodied carbon metrics, and it was definitely jaw-dropping. So thanks for sharing that. So given what you saw earlier in our poll and what we all saw together, it might not come as a surprise that most often the companies that we work with, we find that reuse is informal and ad hoc in one, many, or all of their locations across their portfolio. That makes it incredibly difficult to create programs that scale within one city and especially across cities and even globally. So what I want to do is tell you a little bit about why standardization is the missing link. After all, sometimes it can be smarter to grab surplus furniture from an office that's a 12-hour drive away, like Seattle to San Francisco, than it is to buy new. So on this slide, let me help paint a picture here. And let's imagine we're actually inventorying one of your buildings and it has, let's just say 12 floors. For the sake of this example, we'll narrow down our scope even further and focus on just inventorying all the conference tables in this building. As we go through this process, we ultimately end up inventorying 120 of these conference tables. All 120 tables all look aesthetically similar. They're variations of white and silver with a mix of rectangles and D-top tables. And so you might be asking yourself, or at least I'm asking all of us here, how long do you think it would actually take to log all of these tables in your inventory accurately? Well, when we keep the names generic, like you see here in this slide, it can take anywhere up to a minute or a minute and a half to find the conference table you're looking at or determine if it doesn't exist in your inventory yet and needs to be added. You measure a table that you're looking at and it's 80 inches long. Is that the large conference table in this picture, or is it one of the other ones? It's really tough to tell when you're measuring something and just looking at a picture. What you'd need to do is click in and out of each of these, trying to find the measurements, the manufacturer, confirm the colors. Is that picture white and silver, or is it just white? It's pretty hard to tell. With 120 tables to inventory, that means you could be spending 2 hours or more on conference tables alone, because those clicks, the scrolling, it does add up. And that example I just gave, that was real. This is actually a picture of me on site in that building, not with conference tables. These are with a bunch of like 84 task chairs. But I was on site with a customer trying to navigate these vague titles, feeling the pain and the challenges that they face because of it, truly spending over 2 hours inventorying something that could have definitely taken significantly less than one. And that's precious time that we know it's really hard to give up. We're all busy. Y'all are super busy. It's not nothing. And it's moments like that that led us to understanding the importance of having a standardized naming convention as the key to knocking down this time barrier to entry. And while my example primarily focused on time savings, accurate inventories, and improved data quality, the rewards are also reaped if you standardize when dealing with furniture lead times, sharing across organizations, and scaling the overall circular economy. We've seen circular economy lead times improve from 16 plus weeks to 3 days. And we have customers who've estimated $3 to $5 million in savings by reusing 30 to 50% of their inventory. And so while nicknaming, also a real example, while nicknaming your inventory with internal nomenclature like this really aptly named Mike Wazowski chair, it might be super fun and clever, but it just doesn't scale. Only those who know what to look for when browsing an inventory that leverages lingo like the Mike Wazowski chair or historical knowledge. These kinds of practices, they might spark joy. They might make it easy to tie, but they don't make it easy to tie your inventory back to things like purchase orders, depreciation tracking, browsing surplus, and any ongoing inventory initiatives. And so creating standardized naming conventions, it really does also democratize your inventory. And this applies especially to those folks who maybe already have reuse programs going on in their organizations. You might have that program going, but how many people can tap into that program? How many people can engage with that program? Just the core group that runs it, or how widespread is your impact? And so ideally, when you look to standardization, no longer do only a few employees hold the keys to navigating said inventory. Now teams at your organization, whether it be those who manage the inventory, those who browse it for design projects, or those who might need it for financial reporting, they can all find the products they are looking for in a much easier way. And so now we just had to help our customers figure out how to do just that.
Yeah, and I love the Mike Wazowski show. I gotta say, I mean, I totally I hear you, Zolo. I do love it. I'm like, damn, I really wish we could actually just keep that in your name because it's so fun and it's so well done. But when Zolo came to me, we were talking about that chair. We were talking about like a lot of other customers and some of their fun little names that were also causing some challenges across their scaling. And we started to think through like, does something exist? Like, is there a standard out there, some kind of guidance document that we could look to? Maybe it's just US based or regional based, but some kind of guidance. And we went to Google, like everyone does, searched in like 10 different possible ways. Is there anything out there? And this is what we got. We got that nothing, no single kind of a source of truth or single guide and information exists. There are some, best practices that are being done across manufacturers that would include key features and elements that they include when they create a product listing on their website, but it wasn't some guide that any organization could look to. And you'd have to go across all different manufacturers and look at all their websites to find those best practices. So we were really interested in solving this kind of gap and challenge in the industry. And we had an amazing customer, which we'll speak to in a little bit, who were supportive of this process and wanted to work with us through it. And that's really what we're coming to you today with. So we're going to share all the details, the weeds of how we came about designing some type of standard, what that looks like, and why we think it's really cool for the work that everyone here is doing. And with that, we'll go into kind of the weeds of that case study.
Yeah, thanks, Valentina. And just as you mentioned, we were coming up short, right, on finding those already existing resources. I'm a big fan of not needing to reinvent the wheel, but there was no wheel in this case. And so born out of a customer request, actually multiple customer requests that I was facing, but specifically partnering with one customer, they wanted us to help solve these challenges across their organization. And so I knew I had to loop in our circular economy consulting extraordinaire, Valentina. So I'll set the stage and then I'll let her tell you a bit more about the work she did there. But here's what I shared with her. One of our customers had launched a reuse program. They had already had the reuse program in one of their locations, but they were expanding it across they're working on expanding it across the entire portfolio. And so we had started to expand across 4 different markets in the portfolio. And without standardization within each of those markets and across them, they were having a difficult time with their inventory search yielding meaningful results when you are looking for a very specific kind of task chair, but the titles all say task chair. That gets pretty challenging. Some locations were using very specific naming conventions, while others were using more generic titles, and some were using nicknames. And since this customer was rolling out a global reuse program, it was important to get everyone on the same page so they could create an efficient program, not one that had so many tripping hazards that actually got in the way of real adoption and usage.
Yeah, I'll go into I'll go into the weeds. Okay, so the approach that we designed is definitely rooted in data. We were looking at a variety of data sources, both from our customer side and the employees that are doing this work on the floor every day. What are they experiencing? We're also looking to the industry, the broader industry, for literature review, gap analysis, understanding what exists today. And then we pulled in some amazing experts across JLL, CBRE, and One Workplace to hear from the real estate corporate real estate space across their various organizations. What are they seeing? What would make sense for the broader industry? And some of the examples we found was like this little stat we have from eBay. So eBay learned that, and if you're a big eBay user, like you got to use this now. This is a big takeaway. A longer listing title would result in 1.5 more times of engagement on your product when it comes to buyers on eBay. So the basics of that, like, yes, that is often consumer facing platform for a marketplace, but the basics of that is more information is useful. Like, if you have more information, you understand what you're buying, as long as it's accurate and true, then it really helps you in the moment of trying to make a decision of what you need, and it helps you source something used over buying it new. We compare that back to what we do, and that very much holds true to the conversations we've had with our customers. More information, the better. And throughout this whole process, we've worked with key stakeholders, and they've also shared, well, maybe that's too much information or that's too little. So there is a sweet spot. But throughout this process, it's been amazing to collaborate with experts. And I do want to just huge shout out to all the organizations, JLL, CBRE, One Workplace, of course, our customer who we cannot name, but thank you all so much. This was a very collaborative process, and we learned so much from you throughout the process. So I'm very excited now for drum roll, please. Zolo.
Yeah, that's as good as I got.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. This is the reveal of the standard. And so here you might see that it's quite a simple standard, and simple is good. We want simple. Simple is something that can be adopted and actually used in real life. And I'll break down the elements of this and how we got to it. But at its core, we are including critical information like the product category. So that could be lounge chair, that could be desk, a table. We also are looking at the manufacturer, the model name, and the color and dimensions of the product if it's applicable for that product. And we'll get into those weeds. But this, I do want to preface this that this is the ideal scenario, right? Like, this is if you have all this data, this is the data you should add. We totally acknowledge that you're working with what you got. You might have furniture that is like 15, 10 years old. You don't have a PO anymore. You don't know who the manufacturer is. That is the often scenarios that we encounter. And so if you are in those scenarios, just, omitting any data that does not exist, but trying to add as much as possible. And these are the key elements that we would recommend adding. And when we went into designing this, although it seems quite simple, it was very intentional as to what information we picked to include. So, we talked about how it's really helpful to arm a buyer or a shopper in the moment of making a decision to source used over new. It's really important that they have the core information, the core data that will make them make that decision easily, know that they're confident in their decision. And these elements that we've selected in the title are really the basic core information you need without overwhelming the buyer or the shopper in that moment where it's like too much and now you're trying to juggle a lot of information at once. We also ordered this by priority. So we're working with JLL, CBRE, OWP, folks that have been doing this for many, many years. There's key insights that when I'm coming to source a certain item, I need to see something first. And, the category is top priority, then it's followed by these other elements. So that also influenced how we ordered this based off of the actual user and their experience when shopping for items. And then we got even so detailed to like little things like the dashes between a category and manufacturer. Like, Zola, you experienced this firsthand when you were traveling for some of this work.
Yeah, it's funny. We did get really into the weeds on that kind of stuff. But actually, yeah, dashes are really important in comparison to something like a underscore. And the reason is because of how, when you're using keyword search, for example, how the actual technology processes your query. So if you are doing an underscore, then then it's going to search for that combination. So let's say I underscored task chair, and then like between chair and maybe Herman of Herman Miller. So chair and Herman have the underscore. If I was to type in Herman Miller and search for it, it wouldn't see Herman Miller. It would see Chair Herman. And so now it's searching that as like one word together, versus the dashes allow for that querying to be unique with each item. So definitely don't underscore. The dashes make for easier searching, and spaces just start to like look like, if you don't do anything, it just starts to look like one really long run-on sentence. And so, yeah, definitely a lot of intentionality with the dashes on here.
Yeah, it's wild. Like I would have never known that. So we've tested this. Okay, we put this to the test, and we're pretty confident in what we're sharing here. Also, we can account for, at the start mentioned, data accessible, what you have available when you're trying to find information to fill in here. There's a variety of ways you can go about it. Like you could go actually to the manufacturer's website if you do know at least the manufacturer, get a good understanding from the product brochures. We also, Reaply's big on trying to advance our AI capabilities to take as much data from a picture or a information that we initially have on that product, and then find more data on the actual manufacturer and the model. But we also see a lot of companies that will go to an existing PO if the furniture is not too old, and we would then source that information to fill in the gaps. All of this is something that, in a future state where we have data from the manufacturer that's provided to the customer, that they know exactly all these details, we could see this happening much smoother. And right now we're kind of trying to fill this stopgap of like, okay, we don't have a large system of digital product passports where data is flowing from one organization to another, and that really enables reuse and data sharing. That doesn't really exist at scale today. We see that happening potentially in the future for the furniture industry. And in the meantime, we want to still get the most out of the inventory we have today. And we believe kind of this title like here would be helpful in that process. So with that, let's share like what it looks like in use. This is an example where we're looking at two stools. We have the original, it was just stool, not very helpful. We've now updated it to the new version where we're looking at counter stool. We know the manufacturer's blue dot. We know the model is chip, and the color here is just labeled as blue. Now, if you're looking at a desk or maybe a storage rack, you can see examples that include the dimensions of those items, because in that case, you actually do really need to know the dimensions. There's some products where it applies, some where it doesn't. So we'll get into that in detail as we go into best practices. But this is some examples of how it could be in use for a lot of the common items that might be filling up your office spaces. And so going into those, oh yes, I forgot. We also have an example here for
yeah. Yes. So we're back to the conference tables, but now they're a little different. They've had a little bit of a refresh with the standardized product titles. And so when you look at this, like hopefully you can see just how much improved titles can make a difference here in looking at this inventory and immediately knowing the most important gist of what we're looking at. It's true that a picture is worth 1,000 words, but in this case, it is really the titles that save us. Now we quickly know which product is the 80-inch conference table, especially if we find a label underneath that tells us it's a Narbuda and as the manufacturer and a Nova as the model. Now we're able to rule out other seemingly similar conference tables, even the other Narbuda Nova, because we can see that one's 85 inches instead of 80. So we've just saved ourselves precious hours and minutes of time, and we didn't accidentally mix up which one was the large conference table when, it's really hard to tell the difference between 80 inches and 85. And did the person who called it large, had they not seen the 85 yet? Maybe the 80 was the large. And so when we actually add objective data instead of subjective data to the titles, it really, really can make a huge difference.
Yeah, I love that like real life example of you living through this experience.
Yeah, I'll never forget.
Yeah, it's ingrained in you. Okay, so beyond just like the core elements that we mentioned to include in the title, we have two other kind of key areas where we found best practices will really help you as well for creating high quality data, and that's color and dimensions. So for color, we really recommend, if it's possible, if you have access to the data, the manufacturer specific color is probably the most accurate, because color is fairly subjective, and it would be ideal to grab the manufacturer's name. If that's not possible, that's fine. Go with the closest primary, secondary color that you can find for that product. And then also scenarios where we work with a lot of woods, so the wood tone is important, and that would be something you should be accounting for in the product title as well. Now for dimensions, we've noticed that dimensions apply to a lot of products, but maybe not a task chair that has fairly standard dimensions that are not going to be critical for your work. We really wanted to zone this down to the types of products that are the most important. So tables, surfaces, shelving, storage. Our experts across corporate real estate told us, like, this is really where we struggle the most as designers, across the team when we're doing operations in buildings. We need to know the dimensions of those types of items. Everything else, it's not as critical. So that's really where we recommend you focusing on to do the extra work of adding dimensions. And then we've seen across the board that manufacturers use, typically with depth height, is the order in which dimensions are shared. I'm sure everyone on this call is much more familiar with that than I even am. But continue with that guide. If you're seeing that typically when you're sourcing new furniture, that's what we'd want to also use in these titles. And then last tidbit is just, there's definitely some do's and don'ts, and the don'ts are probably stuff you probably would never even consider doing, but trust me, we've seen it. So please don't be excessive with like special characters. Don't add all these frills to a title. Be really honest in what that product is and the details of it. And then if a manufacturer's name is the title, because that it doesn't look great. So little tiny things. This is often more coming up in marketplace environments where you might be selling or sourcing furniture, and organizations are titling things in a way to get your attention more, or to make it sound more better and enticing. But the result is it actually is not really helpful and is not useful for the purpose of reuse. So keep those in mind. And now we'll just go into, that was an example of working with a customer. We scoped it out. That was really what initiated all of this work. But as we wrapped up that work, we learned across all the stakeholders that we were working with throughout the process that this is much larger than that one customer. It's much larger than Reaply. The broader industry of facilities management and corporate real estate could really benefit from the results of this work. And we hope that if it's shared more broadly, it could be scaled and become more of a common practice across the industry to really advance the circular economy. We've learned a lot and grown a lot through our time starting in the furniture reuse space. And we want you to learn from our experiences, things that we may have overlooked in the past. We don't want your teams to do the same. We want to save you the headache. So we're hoping that this is something that can be used more broadly. And with that, we really speak to the broader ecosystem that we work within. So in this graphic, we're looking at a variety of elements in this space. We've got the workplace teams, we have the designers and the project managers on the top left. They are working pretty heavily with the folks on the right, which are maybe the refurbishers who are refurbishing used furniture. It could be storage and logistics providers who are holding those items until they need to be put back in use. And then beyond the large enterprises that are, all the organizations designed to support them, we have the broader community that we live within. We have the schools, small businesses that may be considered buyers from you. We have nonprofits that are really grateful for all the donations that they receive from large enterprises. And that whole ecosystem is what actually makes the circular economy function and something that can be scaled across the world. But the problem is that when you have so many of these key stakeholders working together to try to create a localized supply chain, it is really important that we are all speaking the same language. The language of furniture is not something that is standardized across. We've talked about that a ton, but it's something that we do think is really critical. So we all know what we're sourcing and how we can keep things in use for longer periods of time. So that would make it a lot easier to buy something used or reuse what you already have before going out and buying it new. And that really helps us address all the challenges that are swirling around the heads of people in corporate real estate right now, which I know Zola knows very well.
Yeah, yes, for sure. I mean, I think it's very obvious that you all have so much going on, right? On top of your daily moves, ads, and changes, or your business as usual sort of projects that are coming up. Y'all are probably dealing with a lot of different stuff right now, like potential returns to office or real estate expansions that come as a part of that. Maybe you're decommissioning due to layoffs, and maybe you're trying to figure out how to navigate the um, upcoming tariffs and how that might impact the supply chain. I mean, there's definitely a lot going on, and it's difficult. Well, I guess I should say we know that not buying new is new for a lot of people, right? I mean, for if we're even seeing that circular economy, reuse, these are big topics that are coming up in the content that this industry is talking about. And so the reality is that why now? Well, change brings a lot of unknowns, but it also brings a lot of urgency sometimes. Well, I guess at least we're seeing from a lot of the customers that we work with. And we saw with moments like COVID where the unexpected happened and we all had to go home and you all had to figure out how to navigate big decisions about your portfolio, right? We've experienced unexpected unknowns and even slightly expected unknowns before and had to react very quickly. And so, it's hard to answer all of these unknowns, but if you can prioritize that reuse, prioritize building that standardization in, it gets a lot easier to have alternate levers that you can pull on when you need to get creative, and you need to get creative quickly. And so really, I think we're here to tell you that you don't need to wait until it's too late to start accessing your own inventory or browsing inventory from other organizations that is used already. You don't want to have another scramble on your hands, and that's kind of why we're sharing this message out, is to help you be prepared proactively. And so how do you make the change at your organization? Well, at a high level, the reality is that shifting from, and we know this firsthand, that shifting from a linear economy first approach isn't just something that happens overnight. It really isn't. It's a behavior change, and it's a mindset shift that definitely needs change management, needs champions, and it needs good, compelling business cases. And so at a high level, the steps you can take is first actually taking the initiative to find out what gaps you have in your inventory. What don't you know, or what aren't you tracking well or at all yet? Then you fix those gaps. What does it look like to fix that? How much time do you need to invest? What are all the different places in which fixing it is appropriate for your organization? And then ultimately training your team to continue that process so that you don't have to go back to square one where you find yourself at the beginning of the need to fix it train all over again. And so while the, find, fix, train situation, it's a good path to success, but sometimes, at least for me, something like that can be hard to understand where to get started. And I'm a big believer of start small so you can test and learn and then implement more effectively. So here are a couple of examples of immediate next steps, but there's definitely way more other things that might be coming up to mind for you as you're listening to this conversation that Valentina and I are having here. But sometimes I think too much planning can get in the way of doing. And so start small, as I mentioned. Pick one room to inventory using the naming convention we talked about today. How did that go for you? What was your experience? And then build your momentum from there. Maybe you decide that on Fridays, everyone inventories a room. Maybe that's just one of the ways that you start to increment and experience and start to learn more about building out this kind of reuse muscle. Another big strategy I recommend is starting a reuse spreadsheet with your team if you don't already have one. We actually have a template that we'll share with you. It's linked here. It has key fields that we recommend tracking in addition to the product title. So this conversation is focused on the product title, but there's plenty of other information that you want to make sure you have associated to your assets that you can click into and go view and pull reports on at any time. And lastly, when you need to procure new furniture, adding check reuse first as step one in that process is another really good tactic to try and implement at your organization. If it doesn't work, you always know how to buy new, right? So if step one is reuse and you don't find anything to reuse, it's not like you have to learn how to do step two. You already know step two. It's buy new. It's your old step one. But if you start with buying new, you'll likely not make it to implementing that reuse mindset shift. So just shift your order a little bit. It doesn't have to go away completely. It doesn't have to be a hard cut, but at least give it a second seat and put reuse in seat one. So with that was a lot. That actually concludes our presentation. But before we say our farewells, as we've been alluding to, I'll pass the mic to my colleague, Jen, who's going to MC the Q&A portion.
Coming. But to kick things off, we will start with a question from Gary, which this was related to the naming convention that we put together. But curious why condition is not a key search criteria in the naming convention.
Mm-hmm. I can take this one, Valentina, and then you can add to it. So that's a great question. As I just mentioned earlier, there are other fields we track on assets that aren't necessarily in the title. And so in the way that we've seen reuse occur, what we're sort of talking about here is the title of the asset. So it's the thing that doesn't change. It will always apply to all of the quantity within that asset. We think about it as product and items. So if your product is that blue dot stool, the information on that product will never change, right? It will always be those dimensions. I mean, unless you remanufacture, but it will always be those dimensions. It'll always be that color. It'll always be that manufacturer and that model, right? But then there are facts that change about the actual item, like the location of that item, the condition of that item. And so we do recommend tracking that information. It's just that the title is more focused on knowing the assets you have. And so, for example, you can think about it. I'm going to take the finance perspective. Maybe you're tracking the depreciation of your assets, right? And so you're looking at your PO and you want to see where XYZ blue dot stools, we're just going to keep using those as an example. We want to see where they're at, where they went, how many we have. At that point, you're going to pull data that will show you the condition and the quantity that you have. But in order to even find the right item, that's where you go for the product title. That's where that standardization really comes into play. So condition is very important, but in the way that you're organizing your inventory, we didn't include it in the title because it is a field that changes versus one that stays consistent. And so you'll see, for example, on Reaply, when you're browsing your inventory, like on our platform, if you're browsing your inventory or you're browsing available surplus, we show condition as like a subset field. So you can see it still pretty clearly, but it's not necessarily the title of the product. So I don't know, Valentina, would you add anything to that or?
Not really. No, I mean, I think the data hierarchy piece of it all and just saying that these are the items that we feel is like the top of the hierarchy. And then there's definitely elements that are sub levels. And we store that data in a little bit of a different way than in the title, but it is still something that we think is critical and should stay with your inventory. You should be able to find that data point on condition. It just might not be in the title itself, but a really good call out, Gary. So I appreciate the question.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing. Okay, next question. In your experience, what are the biggest organizational barriers to implementing standardized frameworks for FF&E reuse? And how can facility managers effectively overcome resistance from departments like procurement or finance who may have differing priorities?
That feels like two questions in one. I like it. Okay, so let's start with, wow, it really takes up quite some good space. That's a great question. Let's start with the barriers piece, I think, and Valentina, I'll let you jump in as well here, but just to kick it off, I think one of the barriers that I see the most is time. Like I mentioned, you all have a lot going on. You're very busy. And so I think it just, and this goes for I mean, every other person outside of facilities management as well. But when you've got something that you have a system down and it works, even if it's not the best system, or, it could be done more efficiently or better or a different way, sometimes that change management of the time to do something differently, it's just hard to justify, even if it will actually have benefit for your organization. So honestly, that's the biggest barrier I see is time and the desire to commit to change, especially something that is still earlier. Like, again, the linear economy is still kind of king right now, and so I think just time to justify that can be the bigger barrier. The other piece that you have here is how can facility managers overcome resistance from departments? It's a great question. I think it's going to be different at every organization. My recommendation is always to try and find champions. So what champions can you find at your organization that can help sponsor your voice and support your voice in those conversations? And what you need for those conversations are also examples of the value added. So, we gave some stats here, but a comparison of how much are you saving? So one of the big metrics we track is replacement cost. If you have a couple of task chairs that are going unused right now, and you need them in a new place, you can look at how much would it cost you to buy that task chair new, and then show these stakeholders like procurement or finance how much you could save by moving it from your existing location in the portfolio to the new location in the portfolio versus buying new. So it's stats like that, it's numbers like that can help paint that picture versus just the compelling nature of the narrative. You can also look up, for example, secondhand prices of those same assets and compare, because the prices are significantly different when you're buying really high quality secondhand in the circular economy versus buying new. And so getting some of that data and presenting it to those procurement and finance teams, as well as not just presenting the pitch, but maybe presenting that example. So if you inventoried that room, or you did a couple of on the side reuse projects where you did move inventory around instead of buying new, being able to then demonstrate that example, even if it's small, can still show how it would be implemented. Valentina, anything to add to that?
I would just say, you hit on this various stakeholders. Something that we do throughout any project when we're implementing a new process, trying the change management piece of it all, is we're always intentionally tapping on stakeholders and identifying them early on across the organization, so that their voice was heard from the start, their feedback was incorporated throughout, and the final product is not something that's a surprise to them. It's something that they contributed to and ideally supported throughout the process. And if there were really big hiccups or challenges that they came to us with, we would have caught them early on in the process, talked through it, understood how we need to change it to make it work for everyone. And then the final product is actually something that we're all on the same page about, and we understand why we're implementing it across a region or organization as a whole. So very much like just start those conversations early on. Zola's point of champions is huge for that. And yeah, no, I agree with everything you mentioned, Zola.
Amazing. We've got a couple more in a few more minutes, so we're doing good here. Can you walk us through, or kind of touch again quickly on how we landed on this specific naming format and how it helps different teams, from inventory managers to end users, work more efficiently?
Yeah. I think for the format itself, we spoke with the people on the ground who are actually going to use this in their daily lives at an organization. And then we also spoke with the broader, as we talked to earlier, the broader teams, other stakeholders external to just the operations teams, to understand the elements that were critical for making this happen at scale. And so when it comes to the process of how we went about this, it was really collecting data from the field, collecting data from the voices of the people who are the most impacted when we implement this. It's on them to actually do the work. There are, of course, other teams that need to support, but there are usually like a core user group that is going to be impacted the most. And we wanted to make sure that their voice was heard as much as possible. And then the last bit was we worked with experts. So we heard from JLL, CBRE, and OWP, what they've seen across industries, across organizations, their experience doing this for many, many years. And that was what influenced the actual format. And then there were a lot of other elements that we touched on around like prioritizing certain information or identifying the core elements and data points that we wanted to include in a naming convention that influenced what the final output looked like. But the influence from other teams was a huge part. And then the last question on how it helps different teams, looking at the actual end users and inventory management. What we've seen, and I feel like, Zola, you can share this really from like core experience on the ground doing this. Of course, the time savings piece, which we touched on, is something that you might be putting some time up front, but in the moment when Zola's on a floor in a building looking at hundreds of the same item, the amount of time it saved her then is crazy when you're scaling that across a full building, a full campus, multiple campuses across the world. That is probably the biggest part, is like the time that you could quantify and look to as like a tangible factor of difference in teams. But beyond that, different locations have their different flow, right? They have their own kind of like culture and style and the way that they go about doing things. And then when you try to blur boundaries and say, okay, no, we're going to share stuff across a larger region. You might call things this, but we call it that. We need to get on the same page. At that point, it really starts to like remove hierarchy that might exist. It starts to put us all on the same level and say that in order to make this happen at scale, we need to talk the same language. And we need to not say that your approach is better than ours or ours is better than yours. That part, I think, really helps with just like bringing together teams, honestly, and like making people talk that don't typically talk and saying like, no, we need to figure this out together. And that has helped us bring various perspectives into the same room, into the same conversation. So we all come out with something that we agree is just better for the broader organization and then, industry as a whole. What do you think, Zola?
Yeah, I was just going to add too on the end user part. So one of the things I was seeing often is that some of our customers did have some semblance of an inventory, especially those who maybe had a warehouse. And even though it was on a spreadsheet, because it was like 6,000 rows of data and the titles were super inconsistent. And so what ended up happening was that the end users were just emailing the inventory managers every time they had a question about something. And then the inventory managers were trying to figure out how to, and they inherited that spreadsheet. So like we saw how that was challenging. And then when we took that list of 6,000 pieces of inventory in the warehouse and we translated it to the new format, now these end users can go in and they can just filter for exactly what they're looking for. And they can see it at a glance. Because the other thing is, on the end user side, when you have to click into everything to get more details, sometimes that's exhausting, and that like even just that 20 seconds extra of work or whatever it is can dissuade someone from going that approach versus just emailing the inventory manager and saying, hey, I'm looking for a red couch, and it's like, well, you could have just looked it up, but if the titles are difficult and they're vague and the pictures aren't great quality, then all of a sudden you're back to square one where this inventory manager is having to do the extra work of going back and forth with the end user. So I think that's just wanted to offer that perspective as well on the end user side.
Amazing. Okay, well, I think that's all for questions. We'll try to answer any remaining ones in the chat after we wrap up today. But the final reveal is here. Okay, we've been talking about it so much, but we're really excited that all the work that we share with you throughout this webinar, it has resulted in a white paper. We are really excited to share this across the industry. The white paper is naming it right, the language of furniture reuse, and we are sharing it all with you to be the first to receive this copy. You can download it for free from our website, and we want to hear from you, right? So like, skim it over, look at it, share feedback. If you actually start to implement some of the little tips that we recommended from the start, let us know how that resonates with your teams, what is working, what isn't. This, as we've mentioned a lot, is the first of its kind. There's going to be ways that we can advance it and improve it, and we'd want your feedback throughout that process. So on the next slide, we have our emails. at any point, please feel free to reach out to Zola and I. We'd love to get your thoughts. And just thank you so much for joining us today. This has been amazing. The questions were amazing, and we really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks so much, y'all.
Bye. Have a good day.